Okay, good morning. Actually, the class last Sunday, we forgot to record. So I'm back at home now. I'm going to go through the same slides that I presented last Sunday, but I'm obviously not going to be able to share all the stories or the questions that were asked. It'll be just kind of a quick overview for completeness. The presentation that I gave, or the class that I gave, was on the delusion-rooted citta associated with doubt. Now, as I explained in the class, I have a problem with this particular citta because unlike the attachment-rooted cittas that we have covered in some detail and the aversion-rooted cittas, which we've also covered in some detail, I can't say that I've had a lot of experience personally with this delusion-rooted citta associated with doubt. Associated with restlessness, lots of experience, but not associated with doubt. And perhaps some of the reason behind this, the reason that I don't have experience with this particular citta, comes from my particular path, my particular journey to the Dhamma. As I have mentioned in the past, giving you a bit about my backstory, I was raised Christian, but then as a teenager stopped going to church and started analyzing in detail different Western philosophers. And I got frustrated by doing this. And I kept saying, hey, these are the best minds that the Western society has ever created, but they can't come to an agreement. So either there is no answer to the kinds of questions they're asking, or they all made a wrong step right out of the door. So they're all off wandering in left field because of a initial wrong assumption or a wrong step. So I spent a few years actually putting aside all philosophy and just doing a lot of deep introspection, inner reflection of what do I personally believe? And I spent so much time, quiet time, just thinking, pondering, reflecting, what do I believe? Finally, I think I was around 19 years old, and my girlfriend's father was a Christian minister. And one day we were out camping, and he asked me about my religious beliefs. And I said, well, Father, I was born, raised a Christian, but have kind of fallen off the path and have spent a few years just kind of doing internal reflection. Never shared them with anyone. And he said, I'd be very interested in hearing them. And so I spoke for like 3 hours, going into detail of everything that I had come up with all on my own. And at the end, he said, well, in the seminary, when I trained to become a minister, I took a course in comparative religions. And what you have described is extremely close to Buddhism. I said, well, Father, I'm sorry, I find that hard to believe. I've never met a Buddhist. I've never read about Buddhism. I don't know anything about Buddhism. And if you're telling me that independently I came up with one of the world's major religions, I find that hard to believe. And he said, why don't you go to the library and get a book? Now, this was way before the internet. So there was a thing called a big building called a library that you went to for books. So I went to the library and got a book on Buddhism. I started reading it and went, yeah, this is exactly what I believe. And so to me, and then later I started practicing meditation, and from my own practice of meditation, it aligned with what was in the texts. And so this gave to me a confidence, a faith that Buddhism actually is true, because I came up with it on my own, or at least I realized it on my own. And my own experience verified it. Actually, what I believe now is that in a previous life, I must have been a Buddhist and studied the texts very carefully so that in this life, when I have the opportunity just to focus and reflect, the mind naturally goes back to the thoughts or the doctrine that I had learned in a previous life. So for this reason, my history, doubt about the practice, doubt about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, doubt about the practice does not arise in my way of in my life. But I know that it does in other people's lives, and it's in the texts. So let's explore it together. But I'm not going to be able to give a lot of personal experiences. Now, the delusion-rooted citta associated with doubt, it is unprompted, which means spontaneous and accompanied by neutral feeling. You can see the neutral feeling by the face as a kind of a neutral face, not a happy face like in the first four cittas, the attachment-rooted cittas, the first four attachment-rooted cittas, not a unhappy face like in cittas 9 and 10, the aversion-rooted cittas, but a neutral feeling. And though it is not explicitly mentioned in this table, this citta is unprompted or spontaneous. Let's look into this in a little bit more detail. Unprompted or spontaneous. Why is the delusion-rooted citta associated with doubt unprompted or spontaneous? Well, prompting requires a degree of deliberate mental engagement. And delusion, by its nature, is the absence of clear knowing. So a mind clouded by delusion lacks the focused energy needed for deliberate prompting. So what we're saying here is if you don't have attachment or aversion, if you just have delusion in the citta, delusion dominates, and delusion lacks the focused energy that you need for deliberate prompting. On top of that, doubt drifts and does not involve any directed intentional effort. So for these reasons, the delusion root and the doubt cittasika by itself, both of them tend to a unprompted or a spontaneous citta. Now, why is it accompanied by a neutral feeling? Again, we'll start with looking at it as a delusion-rooted citta and then look at the function of doubt. Delusion does not lean toward the object with pleasant feeling, attachment, nor push the object away with unpleasant feeling, aversion. Delusion simply fails to engage clearly, suspended, hesitant, unresolved. So this indifferent, unengaged quality is expressed in the neutral tone of the feeling. In other words, delusion by itself is a neutral feeling. But when attachment arises together with delusion, then attachment can lead to pleasant feeling. When aversion arises together with delusion, the aversion causes unpleasant feeling. So, delusion by itself is inherently a neutral feeling. And in addition, doubt keeps the mind uncertain and unable to commit to either towards liking or disliking. So it remains with a neutral feeling rather than pleasure or displeasure. So that uncertainty associated with doubt is another factor which leads to a neutral feeling. Now, just to clarify, doubt is not ordinary questioning or intellectual inquiry. It is paralyzing, wavering uncertainty that prevents the mind from committing to a clear direction. Doubt is the mind that cannot settle, cannot decide, and keeps oscillating between possibilities without resolution. So, for example, if you ask me, how do you get to Ipoh? And I don't have Google Maps, I could not know the answer, but it's not a doubt because the mind is not oscillating or vacillating. Well, maybe this, maybe that. It is a clear of, I don't know. All right. So there's a difference between not knowing and doubt. Doubt is more than simply not knowing. It is not knowing plus the inability to settle, cannot decide between possibilities. So in this specific citta, in citta number 11, delusion obscures the true nature of reality, while doubt is expressed as perplexity as to what supports liberation. And doubt, as well, as we will see, is primarily addressed to spiritual issues, not mundane things like how do you get from here to Ipoh. All right, it's a spiritual question. The opposite of doubt is investigation of Dhamma. Doubt is circular, no resolution. Investigation of Dhamma moves towards clarity. Now, I want to go back. Okay, I guess I can relate to my own personal experience. Those years I spent doing reflections and considering what do I truly believe, those, I can tell you, there was a movement toward clarity. That was investigation of Dhamma, even though I didn't know that term or that concept at the time. There was movement towards clarity. There was progression, whereas doubt is circular and no resolution. Doubt is confused with indecision, whereas this investigation of Dhamma, it's healthy and open-minded. I kept a very open mind. In fact, I read the Bible very carefully. I read the Quran and studied them. That's what was easily available to me. And so it was a very healthy and open-minded. I wasn't fixed. I really was searching and investigating toward looking for clarity. Doubt rooted in delusion, whereas investigation of Dhamma is rooted in wisdom or penetrative understanding. It's based on what wisdom that is based on one's own personal experience. Doubt leads to paralysis, not doing anything. Investigation of Dhamma leads to understanding. And so the fact that I could speak for 3 hours about what I had developed, my personal understanding based on my way of thinking and my experience, shows that those years I was practicing investigation of Dhamma. Now, doubt hesitates because it cannot decide what is true, while investigation examines carefully until truth becomes clear. So this is based on my personal experience. The investigation was careful examination, looking for truth. There wasn't a hesitation and indecision. Doubt asks but remains unresolved, while investigation of Dhamma asks in order to understand and then moves forward. Layer upon layer of beliefs were built through my investigation of Dhamma. So, for example, I noticed that there were examples of people like Mozart, who were born geniuses, or Einstein, born geniuses. And how do I explain that, the fact that there can be these born geniuses? I also saw that even people who are, that everything is, that each individual has a individual personality. Each person has a different personality. And why is it that even identical twins raised in the same household, and as it turns out, my girlfriend at the time that this was happening was an identical twin. And so even though the two of them, my girlfriend and her twin sister, identical twin sister, both of them were studying the same topic, both of them had many of the same interests, but I could tell there is a difference between the two of them. How could I tell? Why is there a difference between the two of them? How do I explain things like born genius or inherent musical talent? To me, I came to the conclusion after a lot of analysis, there must have been a previous life and experiences accumulated that carry forward into this existence. And if there's a previous life and this existence, therefore there must be a future existence. This kind of thinking, this kind of analysis is about stuff that is technically unknowable because, or for me, certainly at that stage, was completely unknowable. I didn't see any future lives. I don't know about what future life might be, but it was it was clear to me there must be a previous life and a future life. The previous life influencing the present life, and the present life influencing the future life. And so this idea of influencing, where good and bad things happen to me, and how I respond, if I respond in a good way, then what I am doing when a bad thing happens and I respond in a good way, it's effectively absorbing that negative energy and putting forward positive energy. If I respond in a bad way, then it is putting forward negative energy. Now, for putting aside all that new world thinking of negative and positive energy, what I was really talking about is karma. So the idea of karma, even though it is not obviously apparent to me while I was sitting and reflecting, it made natural sense to me about that there was this karma, and that it seemed to me that karma could play a role in determining rebirth, or definitely when there was rebirth, the nature of the next existence. So once you've got the idea of rebirth and karma, that once I had that idea in my head, that naturally it made sense to me, other aspects of the Buddhism kind of fell into place. But when I started reading about Buddhism, the very first time I started reading, and when I started understanding that attachment, aversion, and delusion are the roots of unwholesome karma, and non-attachment or generosity, non-aversion or loving kindness, and non-delusion, in other words, wisdom, were the roots of wholesome karma, that it just made perfect sense to me. It was perfectly clear at that time. So, going into the Visuddhimagga's definition of doubt, its characteristic is wavering with regard to the object. Its function is failure to decide. Manifestation is indecision, mental vacillation. The proximate cause, unwise attention to the object of doubt. Now, I want to talk about unwise attention a bit because it's such an important concept. The proximate cause of doubt is turning of the mind toward an object. Now, attention is turning of the mind. Unwise attention is turning of the mind toward the object in an unwholesome way. So, for doubt, it's in a way that frames the object as inherently unresolvable, rather than something that can be clearly known through careful, grounded investigation. So this is what makes the attention unwise. According to the commentary, there are these 8 objects of doubt. Doubt about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. This is the triple gem. This is, when we're talking about the Buddha, we're not talking about the statue. We're talking about the teacher and the fact that there was a teacher and that he had a teaching, which is the Dhamma. And when we talk about the Sangha, we're not talking about the people in orange robes. My personal experience was that I did spend some time as a samanera. I spent a wasa as a samanera after I retired from my day job. And so for 3 months, I was wearing the robes. And I can tell you from personal experience, simply putting on the robes did not purify my mind right away. I was still the same guy I was before, except now I was wearing robes. Fortunately, the robes made me because I respected the robe so much, I was really very mindful and very careful not to disgrace the robe by behaving in an unwholesome way. And so what actually happened one time, I was meditating and I slapped a mosquito. Immediately, I went to my teacher and confessed this transgression. I said, Bhante, I'm so sorry. I have been unmindful. There was a mosquito. I slapped it and I killed it. I feel regret. And what my preceptor, the monk, said is, it is correct that you should feel regret. You should take your precepts again, make your precepts pure again, and make an effort. Be more mindful to make sure that it does not happen again. So, from my own experience, I can tell you that just because one is wearing the robe doesn't make one pure. When we talk about doubt about the Sangha here, we're not talking about the average monk in a robe. We're talking about the Aryan Sangha, those who have attained enlightenment and the purity of their behavior, which is exemplary. And therefore, they are worthy of faith. They are trustworthy. And so so we're talking about the Buddhism Sangha, doubt about the training. Now, here, yes, it uses the word citta. The Pali uses the word citta for training. And you recognize this word when we take the precepts. Those are rules of training. So lay people take 5 precepts. People on retreat take 8, Samanera take 10, monks take 227 different precepts. But this is not about though the precepts are very broad-based, they talk about behavior, not necessarily about approach. So when we're talking about doubt about the training, we're talking about the type of behavior. We're not talking about the approach. And what do I mean by that? When I practice meditation, I use the Mahasi method, but I fully acknowledge that there are other methods. The Goenka method, the Pa'ao method, Thai forest method. There are multiple methods. That's just within the Theravada tradition. There are also other methods outside the Theravada tradition. Initially, when I was in Canada, I practiced Zen Buddhism. There is Mahayana, Vajrayana. So when we're talking about the type of training, I'm not saying that Theravada, or rather that the Mahasi method is the only correct method. What I have just through a set of circumstances kind of fallen into is that my friends, my Kalyanamita, tend to be in that Mahasi group. The retreat center that is close to me, an hour away, is Mahasi. And so it's convenient for me. I have many teachers of the Mahasi tradition. So that is why I have fallen into the Mahasi approach. If things had been different, if I had gotten in with the Goenka group and into the Goenka practice, or the Pa'ao method and the Pa'ao practice with Pa'ao practitioners, I would be perhaps following a different type of training. But I genuinely believe that the path to enlightenment, there can be many paths. And so therefore the Mahasi path It's convenient for me. It makes sense to me. It's great. But I'm not discounting the validity of other paths. What I will say about this, however, is once you have picked your path, stick with it. Don't go jumping one retreat Mahasi, one retreat Goenka, because each of the different teachers has a slightly different approach to how to deal with the hindrances, to deal with problems, different way of framing the practice. And if you keep jumping around between different retreat centers, different types of practice, you can create confusion, and that can be a condition for doubt. Because you say, hey, Pa'ao said one should do the practice of samatha meditation to the point of jhana before one goes into vipassana. Mahasi says, don't worry about the absorption jhanas, focus on dry insight on vipassana directly. That's two different philosophies. Who is right? I don't know. But it so happens that my group of friends are in the Mahasi group, so I follow the Mahasi approach, and I will follow it, continue on until it progresses, as it progresses. So that's doubt about the training. Doubt about the past or previous lives, doubt about the future or future lives, doubt about rebirth altogether, the past and future together, doubt about dependent origination. This is not a doubt about the details. Actually, we could spend class after class, we probably will, going through the technical details of Paticcasamuppada, dependent origination. But that's not the kind of doubt I'm talking about. This here is doubt about the general idea that there is this idea of samsara, that we are trapped in this continuous rebirth until there is enlightenment. So these are the objects of doubt according to the commentary. You'll notice that how do you get from here to Ipo is not included in the list of doubts. Now the problem is not the object itself. It's the inability to establish firm understanding of that object. And these are not casual questions. They are deep, persistent uncertainties about the most fundamental dimensions of the path. Again, this is not whether one should do samatha before vipassana or vipassana directly, as different teachers have promoted. There are some teachers like Sri Umin who focused primarily on the developing of Chittanupassana, the mind. There is the Thai forest tradition, which as a different practice. Again, it's not about those practices, the difference in details of the practice. It is in the fundamental idea, the fundamental principles, behavior and fundamental principles. All of those different traditions have the same kinds, promote the same kind of behaviors. Sila, Samadhi, Panya, they all promote those same behaviors, though the details of the practice may be slightly different. A yogi with doubt cannot make firm progress. The mind keeps pulling back, second guessing the method, or questioning whether liberation is even possible. So doubt really is holds the yogi back. Holds the yogi back in a couple of different ways. As a hindrance, this is the first way, doubt prevents the mind from concentrating, keeps the mind from entering the calm, because attention is divided by suspicion and uncertainty. So hindrances block concentration. Doubt blocks concentration by stopping the mind from calm, because the mind is always suspicious, uncertain, wavering back and forth, and that blocks the serenity, the unification of the mind, the calmness, the tranquility that is necessary. Therefore, doubt is a hindrance. Doubt is also a fetter. A fetter is something that keeps one on samsara, binds one to samsara. It's a fetter. Doubt is a fetter by binding the mind in indecision, preventing progress on the path to liberation. The Sotapanna completely and permanently uproots doubt. So any crippling uncertainty is gone. What makes one a Sotapanna is the experience of Nibbana. Once a person has experienced Nibbana, it doesn't make sense in that person's mind to have doubt about the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or training, because they have experienced personally the effectiveness, the power of practice. So therefore, asking a Sotapanna, do you doubt the Buddha? They say, how could I doubt the Buddha? The Buddha's teachings, the Dhamma, and the Aryan Sangha are examples of how I got to this experience of Nibbana, this enlightenment experience of Nibbana. So there is no possibility for any doubt in the Sotapanna's mind about any of these objects. Now, the Sotapanna may still not know all the Abhidhamma. They may not be an expert or even have studied the Abhidhamma. But that crippling uncertainty cannot arise because the Sotapanna, has experienced Nibbana. So here's an analogy. Doubt is like a traveler at a crossroads who cannot read the signpost. So, for example, imagine I go to Myanmar. I want to go from where I am to another city. I come across a road. I'm walking along the road and I come across a signpost. But everything is written in Burmese, and I don't read Burmese. I think, well, maybe the path to the right is the right one. Oh, no, maybe the path to the left is the right one. There's a signpost. There's a road. It's not the path is there, but I can't figure out. Is it this way? Is it that way? Should I turn right or should I turn left? So the traveler stands still, takes a few steps one way, comes back, tries another direction, returns again. Hours pass, no progress made. Now the destination exists, the paths exist, but without the ability to commit, the journey does not begin. So doubt is not the absence of a path, it's the inability to step onto it. Now here's another example. Doubt is like a compass whose needle spins continuously without settling on north. So imagine that, there's a place in northern Canada which is the magnetic North Pole of the Earth. And anywhere else on Earth, the compass, if you've got a compass, the magnetic field causes the compass needle to align to point towards that North Pole, magnetic North Pole. Now, if I happen to be standing right on that North Pole, magnetic North Pole, it's not the physical North Pole that the Earth spins around, it's a magnetic North Pole. If I happen to stand right at that location, the compass needle can't point anywhere. It's just going to spin around. Every direction looks north, looks like it's north. The compass isn't broken in the sense of lacking parts. It simply cannot commit to an orientation. So until the needle settles, navigation is impossible, assuming you don't have GPS, right? If you're just trying to navigate by a compass, you're stuck. So doubt is the mind's inability to orient itself decisively toward what is true. Cannot understand true north because, or magnetic north in this case, because the compass cannot fix. In daily life, doubt arises as the inability to commit to a spiritual path or practice. One day I try this approach, next day I try that approach. persistent skepticism about whether karma and its results are real, doubting whether one's own practice is correct or will bear fruit. Now, I can't tell you whether I mean, okay, I am not a sotapanna. I have not attained enlightenment. However, do I believe that my practice that I am following could in the future? Yes, I have no doubt that it could in the future, even though I haven't personally experienced it. So, do I believe that again, Goenka or Pa'au could attain, people practicing that way could attain enlightenment? Yes. Why do I believe that way? In the suttas, it is in the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, the Buddha was asked, are there any saints, people who have attained enlightenment, using practices outside of the Buddha's Dhamma? And the Buddha replied, any practice, for a practice to attain enlightenment, it must have the Noble Eightfold Path. That's the requirement. The technical details of how it works, that is not the key issue. The key issue is, do they follow the Noble Eightfold Path? And I will tell you that whether it's Mahasi or Pa'au or Goenka, Thai Forest, Zen, Vajrayana, they all hold the Eightfold Noble Path in the highest regard. So all of those practices are correct and will bear fruit. Also, intellectual circling without resolution on Dhamma questions. To me, I see there are some people who are so focused on analyzing the wording of the sutta and analyzing the history and analyzing the influence. To me, what's important is the message. Let me just clarify this. There is in the Digha Nikaya, there is the long discourse on the Satipatthana Sutta, Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the foundation of practice, Vipassana practice. But also within the Theravada tradition, in the Majjhima Nikaya, in a different text, there is the Satipatthana Sutta. So, two virtually identical suttas. When I say virtually identical, they are identical word by word, except in one small section of Dhammanupassana, where the Digha Nikaya, the longer version, spends multiple pages discussing the Four Noble Truths as an object of Satipatthana meditation, whereas the version in the Majjhima Nikaya covers it in one paragraph, covers the Four Noble Truths as an object of Dhammanupassana in one paragraph. So that led me to wonder, hey, which sutta did the Buddha actually say? Because everything else is identical. It was the same location, the same group of people, but two different suttas have different descriptions of how Dhammanupassana Four Noble Truths should be practiced as an object of Dhammanupassana. So I asked a very educated Sayadaw, one with a PhD. I was driving him to the airport after a retreat, and I asked him, I said, hey, the Mahasatipatthana Sutta and the Digha Nikaya, the Satipatthana Sutta and the Majjhima Nikaya, how come there's two of them? Which one did the Buddha speak? And he answered, because of Bhanika. Bhanika is a reciter. And let me explain what he meant. So the Buddha during his lifetime gave about 10,000 suttas. And if you're not Ananda who could remember absolutely everything, that's way too much for one person, one monk, to remember and pass down to your student monks. And since the transmission of the Dhamma was oral at that time, it was very important that things be carried out properly. So during the first first council, the monks split themselves into 5 groups and said, okay, this group, you are the ones responsible for the Vinaya. You memorize the Vinaya and make sure that word by word the Vinaya is transmitted orally 100% correct. This group, you're responsible for the Digha Nikaya, the suttas that are in the longer suttas. This group, you're responsible for the Majjhima Nikaya. So this group of reciters that took responsibility for perfectly transmitting one group of suttas are called Bhanaka. So there were 2 groups, the Bhanakas for the Digha Nikaya and the Bhanakas for the Majjhima Nikaya, that took the same sutta and passed it down slightly differently. There's no way of knowing which one was accurate, for sure. Now, actually, there's actually been books written on the origin of the Satipatthana Sutta, but to me, that's not relevant. That kind of intellectual circling, because there is no resolution on Dhamma questions, that is not relevant. Even though the Digha Nikaya version and the Majjhima Nikaya version have different descriptions of different descriptions of the Four Noble Truths, a detailed and a simple description, it doesn't change the method of practice. It doesn't change the message and the suttas. In the sutta, so the practice is the same, the message is the same. Yeah, some of the details a little bit varied, but that little bit of varying of details doesn't bother me at all. So also, doubt in daily life can arise as undermining the trust in the teacher or the method after each sitting. So after the sitting, you go, I don't know if this teacher's giving me the right method because he spoke differently than the previous teacher. Don't think that way in daily life. In meditation, doubt arises as, hey, is this practice really working? Am I making progress? Am I noting the right object? Is Mahasi method the correct approach, or Pa'ao or Goenka? Or can someone like me attain anything at all? Now, each thought seems reasonable, but they block continuity of mindfulness. When you start thinking like this, if you bring that up to the teacher's just going to tell you, keep noting. So doubt prevents the mind from settling into direct observation. Doubt and the free thinker. Actually, the first time I heard the term free thinker is when I came to Asia. I'd never heard the term in Canada before. I remember I came to Asia, and I would mention to someone, oh, I am a Buddhist. Because at that time I was already practicing meditation, I was practicing Buddhism. And they would counter with, oh, I'm a free thinker. I thought, what is a free thinker? And I realized that that's someone in the Asian context who rejects all the formal religion and just on their own. Now, if that person rejects belief through clear understanding, careful reflection, and evidence-based discernment, this is associated with wholesome factors such as investigation of Dhamma, not doubt. So in the few years in Canada when I was doing that deep internal reflection, there was not doubt. There was investigation of Dhamma. However, if that rejection comes from mere uncertainty, distrust, or a general unwillingness to commit to any view without investigation, then it can be doubt, especially when it remains unsettled and does not lead to clearer understanding. If they just use, oh, I'm a free thinker, as an excuse not to think about these important topics, that is doubt. Now, the Chitta of decision or resolution, which is in Pali adhimokkha, is directly opposed to doubt. Doubt is the one karma-creating citta in which adhimokkha is absent. So all of the unwholesome karma-creating cittas, all of the wholesome karma-creating cittas have the cetasika of adhimokkha, or decision or resolution. All of the active cittas have that cetasika of decision or resolution, adhimokkha, except for this one citta, citta number 11, the delusion rooted associated with doubt. This is why, so doubt and adhimokkha cannot co-arise. So it blocks the arising of adhimokkha. And that's why doubt is so debilitating. The capacity for mental decisiveness has been displaced. Decisive in a positive way or in a negative way, no adhimokkha. The remedies for doubt in the suttas include, or in the commentary, include learning and studying the Dhamma thoroughly, questioning a qualified teacher, developing confidence through practice itself. So saddha, confirmed by experience. When one's own personal experience matches up with what the Dhamma teacher is saying, what's in the text, you go, yeah, it is true. It is true. There is this momentary arising existence and falling away, just like it says in the text, just like the Dhamma teacher said. That's what I personally experienced. That gives confidence. Reflecting on the internal consistency and coherence of the Dhamma. Those 10,000 suttas, though there could be small details that are a little bit, may seem on the surface to be inconsistent between different versions, at the heart, they are consistent and coherent. The Dhamma is consistent and coherent. And associating with those who have resolved their doubt, Kayana Mita, the spiritual friends and noble friends, spending time with them will help you address your own doubt. When doubt occurs during meditation, the yogi should note doubting. And that noting does three things. It names the mental event as an object, separating the observer from the doubt. So the mind is not caught up in the sitting or the Dhamma or whatever as the object of doubt. The mind has been turned inwardly and is observing the state of that noting. There's doubt happening right now. It prevents the doubt from proliferating and into discursive internal questioning. If the focus is on what the mind is doing, the mind is less likely to get churned up in, well, maybe this is correct, maybe that is correct, who knows. And it replaces the delusion-rooted citta with a wholesome-rooted noting citta. And after a few moments of clear noting, the doubt passes, and you can go back to the primary object of rising and falling of the abdomen, or sitting and touching, whatever you're currently focusing on. So what's important is the yogi must not engage with the content of the doubt, like, is this method correct? Is the teacher right? The doubt itself is the object, not its content. Doubt, as another analogy, doubt is like a fog on the road at dawn. Fog does not attack the driver. It simply removes visibility. The driver slows down, becomes hesitant, cannot see the road clearly because of the fog. That's the nature of doubt. The mind slows down, becomes hesitant, can't see the path clearly. The remedy is not to argue with the fog, but to wait patiently and keep moving slowly. And as the sun rises, the practice deepens, the fog naturally dissipates. Doubt is not an enemy to be fought. It is a condition of obscuration that yields to steady, patient practice. Now, when doubt dominates, energy becomes hesitant. When doubt happens, the mind doesn't commit to sustained noting, sustained learning, or sustained practice because it keeps waiting for some imagined perfect certainty. Doubt is strengthened by unwise attention to the object as something to be judged, defended, or speculated about, and doubt is weakened when the object is known simply as phenomena arising and falling. So instead of knowing the object directly, the mind begins to spin around theories, opinions, alternative interpretations, and when this happens, the object becomes a topic for endless thinking rather than a phenomena to be known. Now, as understanding deepens, as your practice deepens, the mind becomes less fascinated by questions that do not lead to direct seeing. So here's some frequently asked questions. How is doubt different from delusion that is present in all 12 unwholesome cittas? Delusion is the universal background blindness present in all akusala, unwholesome cittas. It's the darkness that hides the true nature of phenomena. On the other hand, doubt is specific, active mental moment, the oscillating, wavering quality of uncertainty directed at specific objects such as the Buddhism, Sangha, and the practice itself. As an analogy, delusion is like a room with the lights off. Everything's dark. Doubt is like someone in that dark room who keeps picking up one object and putting it down, unable to identify what it is. Delusion is the condition. Doubt is a specific symptom arising within it. Next question. Can a person have conceptual knowledge of the Dhamma and still experience doubt? Absolutely, yes. And this is commonly observed among serious students. Intellectual understanding of Abhidhamma or doctrinal concepts does not by itself uproot doubt. Doubt is a latent tendency, anusaya, which we talked about earlier. It manifests in spite of conceptual knowledge because knowing and the habit operate at different levels. A person may be able to explain the Four Noble Truths precisely, yet still experience paralyzing uncertainty in the moment of practice. Direct insight, panya, this is the penetrative understanding, not conceptual knowledge, is what progressively weakens and finally uproots doubt at the Sotapanna path method moment. Finally, how does vipassana noting weaken the delusion-rooted citta associated with doubt? When doubt arises and is noted as doubting, the wholesome noting citta displaces the delusion-rooted citta. Now, two cittas cannot arise in the same moment. Over time, the yogi observes that doubt itself arises, stands, and passes. It is impermanent. Doubt itself is impermanent, conditioned, and non-self. And each time this is clearly seen, the latent tendency of doubt is actually weakened. The meditator also builds confidence progressively. Each moment of clear noting is direct evidence that the method works, which over time makes doubt increasingly difficult to sustain. At the Sotapanna path moment, the latent tendency of doubt is permanently eradicated. So going back to our comparison on the cittas, we see citta number 11 is unprompted, associated with doubt, neutral feeling. The distortion, the negative way in which it works is paralyzing uncertainty about the true nature of things. The typical behavior, wavering indecision, circular non-commitment. Going back to our analogy, our extended analogy of the person at the buffet, the person stands in front of the buffet and thinks, I'm not sure if this food's safe. Maybe it's fine, but what if it's not? I can't decide. I'll wait a little longer. They stand there while everyone eats. The remedy in the from the suttas and commentary, just to summarize, study of the Dhamma, wise reflection on the triple gem, association with Kalyanamitta, confidence through consistent practice, doubting when doubt arises. Okay, so I'm sorry that the class itself did not get recorded. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what was covered without the Q&A that was so interesting during the class, and we will be more careful to record the classes in the future. Thanks a lot.